new life. With hopes of freedom and more fruitful pastures, one by one, first trading with the Indians, then clearing land for farmland, and then finally, they moved on, their skills and spirit more suited to the wilder frontier. But before they departed, they made their mark in the shape of a diamond and named it for a woman whose face we will never see. Her town lives on and flourishes to this day. Elizabethtown, a diamond from Donegal. It's hard to believe that only 300 years ago, central Pennsylvania was mostly woodland and was at the very edge of the frontier. Bands of Native Americans were unsettled geographically as a result of European occupation to the east. Indians, who were members of a tribe called the Piscataways or the Conoys, met with William Penn and negotiated a settlement in the Pennsylvania region.
It's very interesting that there's a creek that runs through Elizabethtown that bears the name of Conoy Creek, and that name actually comes from the name of the native peoples that lived along the Susquehanna near Elizabethtown in the 18th century before Europeans came into the area. They were called the Conoy Indians. They are not native to the Susquehanna Valley. They actually migrated into the Susquehanna Valley in the early 18th century, but settled in the Conoy Creek area in around 1718 and lived there until about 1743.
The very first Europeans to arrive at Conoy Creek were Scotch-Irish. Centuries of conflict in Ireland had formed the will and spirit in the Irish people that translated well to the frontier lifestyle.
So these people who come are a fiercely independent group of people, very hardy, very firm in their beliefs, and they settle on the frontier. They do serve as the buffer against the Indians.
By the 18th century, many native peoples throughout the mid-Atlantic region were almost entirely dependent on European-made objects.
Beaver pelts provided by the Piscataways were traded for cloth, beads, and whiskey, among other items prized by the Indians.
Beaver pelts were favored because they had become very fashionable to wear beaver hats in Europe.
So indeed, it is trade and commerce that are at the base of Elizabethtown's foundation. To find out more about these early Scotch-Irish settlers who will ultimately found Elizabethtown, we can look to their home country of Ireland for clues. To take one look at Ireland is to fall in love, and one must ask the question, why would anyone have left here? The land in County Donegal, Ireland looks much the same today as it has for centuries. Its lush green pastures, so beautiful to the eye, can actually be very deceptive. Farms here, unlike in Lancaster County, yield no tomatoes, corn, or melons. In fact, this forbidding soil, called peat, is often itself harvested and used for fuel in fireplaces and wood stoves. The produce in County Donegal is limited mostly to rooted vegetables like potatoes and carrots. Subsisting from the land here takes a rugged spirit and much ingenuity, making ample harvests in the New World greatly appealing. In the 18th century, years with weak Irish harvests can be correlated to an increase of families emigrating to the States. Still, it is hard to imagine anyone wanting to leave such a beautiful countryside for an unknown world, especially considering the risky journey across the Atlantic. More clues can be found in the political and religious history of County Donegal in the 1700s.
The district was predominantly Protestant, and within the Protestant community, Presbyterians outnumbered Episcopalians, or members of the Church of Ireland, in every single area. And that was to have a profound effect upon the political culture of the district, and was to have a profound profound effect on the mentality of those Presbyterian people, that they were in a majority in that area, and yet while they were in a majority they felt they were very hard done by. They essentially felt that they were second-class citizens. If you go to any of the little towns around Letterkenny and you look for the oldest Presbyterian church, it is almost invariably built on the edge of the town, on a back road out of the town, a place of no import or distinction, because Presbyterians were regarded as less important than members of the established church. Presbyterians had to pay taxes for the support of the official state religion, the Episcopalian Church. So did Catholics. People had to support a religion that wasn't their own.
This oppression of Presbyterians in County Donegal accounts for why the vast majority of early Irish settlers in the Elizabethtown area were Presbyterian. In fact, as the small settlements grew in the States, letters coming back to Ireland from the New World were requesting Presbyterian ministers. Add to this a famous series of evictions by landlords who are upping the rents beyond farmers' ability to pay, and one can understand why many Scotch-Irish chose to leave in the early 1700s.
It's an amazing thing to think that when they came here, they were coming into a total wilderness. Depending on the season of the year, they were not coming to an area where they could find shelters built for them or land cleared for crops. They were coming into a place where there was nothing.
By 1722, in just 5 short years, the settlement had grown to dozens of Scotch-Irish households, and the Donegal Presbyterian Church had been established. Families lived in small log cabins, with some surrounding woodland cleared for small-scale farming. In 1738, the road to Lancaster opened, and well, it was somewhat different than we know it today.
There are instances where people get lost on the main road. This is the main road going to Lancaster, and someone just gets lost in the woods. Sometimes, because of livestock, people put fences or other barriers across the main road.
While so far this small settlement bears no resemblance to a town, we find that an important focal point emerges in 1745.
Probably the first actual settler in Elizabethtown is Thomas Harris, who came from Raphoe in County Donegal. He established himself on the banks of Connoy Creek, and he had a tavern of sorts, a little log building, very close to the creek. And as he prospered, in 1745, he built the stone building that's still standing. And that was the sign of the Bear in Donegal.
People from all over the region would meet or pass through the Sign of the Bear Tavern. It was a place where business was done, politics were discussed, and issues of the day were contemplated. In fact, it served to bring the small Donegal settlement together. In a few years, the tavern would have a new owner, Barnabas Hughes, an astute businessman who would forever leave his mark here.
Hughes and his wife, whose name was Elizabeth Waters before she was married, came from County Donegal, but he rather quickly became interested in business. And they really were much more important people in colonial business world than if you just focus on Hughes as a tavern keeper. He sounds like somebody with a white apron behind a bar, when actually he was rather a prominent businessman and entrepreneur.
Hughes would add to his resume the creation of a small town, named for his wife Elizabeth and patterned after the diamond-shaped towns in his homeland of County Donegal.
Creating this little town was just one of his many ventures. But it was one that was evidently very close to his heart because he oversaw it pretty much himself. We know that he began selling lots in 1763, at least that's the first documented one. He not only laid out Peach Alley and Cherry Alley and Market Street and High Street, but those are the names that he gave them. So in a way, Barney Hughes is still hovering over the town.
Lots originally cost 15 shillings plus 10 shillings rent. Most early buildings were log structures, but each had to have a stone, lime, or brick chimney. Winter's Heritage House Museum is an excellent glimpse into early town life in a log structure. The small town was on its way when Hughes moved to Baltimore in 1761, although he still oversaw the venture. The region was changing. The fur trade had moved north and west with the Indians in the 1740s, and now in the 1760s and 70s, the German and Scotch-Irish were settling in. Elizabethtown was ready to meet the world. Waves of immigrants were still coming to America, and many more German settlers were arriving in the Elizabethtown region. In fact, by the early 1800s, the Scotch-Irish were no longer a majority here, some preferring to move on as the frontier moved west. The German groups were drawn to Pennsylvania in part because of the many beliefs they held in common with Pennsylvania Quakers and William Penn, and the Germans grew roots.
They sort of had values, to generalize, that were like a threefold or a trinity: God, land, and family. All right, that family is very important. Family working the land is very important. Staying on the land, being good stewards of the land, making it productive so you could pass it on to your children and your children's children and your children's children's children is very, very important. And you're doing this because God has asked you to be the steward of this land.
Naturally, they brought their churches with them. And we have, quite early, we have what was known as Blosser's Church, which was German Reformed, and it was just outside Elizabethtown. The Catholic Church began on the farm of Heinrich Eckenroth. Probably the first church that actually is in Elizabethtown is the Lutheran Church. And the people who settled in this immediate area, probably the first group, were nearly all Swiss Germans. And the town itself tends to be heavily German from the very beginning. It's founded by an Irishman, but its inhabitants are nearly all German.
The Germans built for permanence, and many of their early stone and brick structures remain. As the population grew, the small town needed to connect, and an Irishman named James Duffy was contracted to build the Lancaster-Middletown Turnpike. This toll road was completed in 1818, and milestones from this construction still survive.
It's Market Street in Elizabethtown. It may have shifted a little bit here and there in different places. Obviously, roads anywhere over the years have a tendency to move a little bit to this side, a little bit, but it's basically the same road.
By 1815, the town boasted 50 homes. It was a thriving market town with goods, livestock, and small shops. 1827 is the year when Elizabethtown attained borough status, and it is this year that is celebrated today, commemorating Elizabethtown's birth. Construction of the Harrisburg-Lancaster single-track railroad encountered an obstacle in 1836. A 900-foot tunnel had to be cut just east of Elizabethtown, no easy task. Most railroad work was done by Irish workers, a rugged bunch who sometimes conflicted with townspeople. After a suspicious fire behind the Black Horse Inn was attributed to the workers, Elizabethtown established the Union Fire Company, an all-volunteer force. The railroad was completed in 1838. Now connected, the town was changing, as was the nation, and turbulent times were ahead for both. By the mid-1800s, national tensions between the North and South were felt countrywide, as slaves were traveling north to freedom by way of the Underground Railroad. Several Elizabethtown buildings are rumored to have been Underground Railroad stops, including the Sign of the Bear and a prominent restaurant on Market Street. When war broke out, Elizabethtown supplied troops to the Pennsylvania militia to protect against General Lee's invasion. But as the war drug on, small towns had trouble supplying their quota of able-bodied men, and drifters were recruited to serve in the town's name for a price.
By 1863, the Union was reduced to drafting men, and quotas are assigned to every township and municipality. The town had to meet its quota by hiring people. The Civil War is a great war for service by substitute.
No one knew in June of 1863 just how far north the Confederate troops would push. Many Elizabethtown residents packed up valuables and were ready to leave at a moment's notice. As the Southern troops reached the Susquehanna, they were stopped short by a charred bridge which had been burnt to the quick by Union troops. Troops from both sides then gravitated to Gettysburg for what would be the war's pivotal battle. By 1864, Elizabethtown was comprised of 164 homes and businesses, 5 churches, 2 schools, and a firehouse. By 1880, there were over 900 residences. The town was exploding, yet some modern advances had yet to arrive. Major cities were benefiting from the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s, but this initially hurt the small town economies. And another problem was emerging. Without centralized water system, town buildings were vulnerable to fire.
They bought a little hand-pumped engine, and they had volunteer firemen who worked that. There still remained the problem of water because they could only be supplied by wells.
Spurred on by the fire problems, centralized water mains were installed in 1895. And in 1899, the railroad added a second track to the system. Elizabethtown was now ready for the arrival of industry, and the face of the town would be forever changed. The dawn of the 20th century saw industrialization spreading throughout the town at an amazing rate. No longer were town businesses limited to sales in the immediate area. Agricultural machinery, wagon parts, chocolate, and wheelbarrows all soon to be produced here and sent out nationwide. But none would have more of an impact on this small town than the shoe industry.
This was the era when all men had initials for names. A.S. Kreider, you know. Aaron Kreider had been actually a storekeeper. He bought a bankrupt shoe factory. From that, then, he began to go on a much larger scale, and he selected Elizabethtown as the main place to focus his manufacturing.
The Kreider shoe factory went from producing 200 pairs a day near the turn of the century to 5,000 pairs a day in 1915, and they were employing 450 people. Wither's Baby Shoe Factory was a successful spin-off of A.S. Kreider in 1918.
The shoe industry then had a great deal to do with the expansion of the town, whole streets of new houses built, giving employment not only to people who already lived here, but giving incentive to other people to move to Elizabethtown.
Another booming business was Buch Manufacturing, who were making a national mark in the agricultural equipment industry.
They manufactured wheelbarrows, and they claimed to be the first commercial wheelbarrow establishment in the United States, plus the motto was carrying the load since 1868. The initial factory that they built was located at the corner of South Market Street and College Avenue. And for a source of power, they had a blind horse and a water wheel that they used from the stream bed down there. The plant burned down, and they relocated the plant out on South Market Street, which was just recently torn down.
It was from this location that Buch Manufacturing would reach out to the nation. No single image represents Elizabethtown's 20th century coming of age better than this photo of a 20-car train loaded with Buch wheelbarrows heading west in 1906.
My dad and my Uncle Royer were standing alongside the train, and this was the first load of wheelbarrows that started out and went the whole way to Chicago, and I think they went the whole way out to California.
Anchor Springs Wagon Works was echoing Buch's success by manufacturing wagons and carriages, as well as a fifth wagon wheel used for steering, at their factory on West High Street.
Far from being a Henry Ford kind of assembly line, that they basically made a wagon to your specifications.
But another business venture would soon shape Elizabethtown when William and Frederick Klein left Hershey in 1912 to compete in the chocolate industry.
The whole chocolate industry came to Lancaster County to take advantage of the great number of dairy farms. As employees of Milton Hershey in his early days, they learned how to do this and came to the conclusion that we could do this by ourselves.
The Kleins had a knack for chocolate and business. Early on, they were so small they had to sell existing chocolate before buying new cocoa beans. But by World War I, they shipped 20 million chocolate bars over to our troops, and by 1922, they were the nation's biggest chocolate company. The Klein Chocolate Company had a reputation for being community and employee friendly. They created an athletic field and even sponsored a semi-pro baseball team to the enjoyment of the community. This incredible transformation in Elizabethtown in the early 1900s was not limited to manufacturing. It was also the beginnings of Elizabethtown College and the arrival of Masonic Homes, two organizations which remain mainstays in Elizabethtown to this day.
It could have been elsewhere, and there was a lot of discussion, 1898 I suppose it was, the Reverend J.G. Francis, who was a bicycle riding itinerant preacher in the Church of the Brethren tradition, was crusading to establish a college in eastern Pennsylvania that would be founded by the so-called German Baptist Brethren, now called the Church of the Brethren. So they had this meeting in 1898 and decided in a series of meetings that followed that there would be a college here in this tradition. And they debated where it would be. They thought it might be in Ephrata. They thought it might be elsewhere in Pennsylvania. They talked about different names, but they finally settled on having it in Elizabethtown and calling it Elizabethtown College.
Alpha Hall was the first building completed in 1901. Initially, the college had 27 students and 3 faculty, and they did not award a degree until 1921. Today, the college enrolls well over 1,500 students and is often ranked as one of the nation's best regional liberal arts colleges. Elizabethtown's centralized location was also critical in the decision by the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania to select land outside the town for what would soon be Masonic Homes.
Back at the turn of the last century, around 1903, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania started to look for a location to provide services, and over 26 different locations across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania were reviewed. And finally, they came to the conclusion that here in the Elizabethtown area was the absolute best, and they chose this site, and over 900 acres were purchased at that time.
Grand Lodge Hall was the first building to be completed in 1913. Masonic Homes has grown tremendously in its scope of health care, retirement living, and other services throughout this century, and continues to be a major employer in the Elizabethtown area. This solid economic base in the early 1900s allowed the town to fare relatively well throughout the era of the Great Depression compared to many parts of the nation. During the Second World War, Elizabethtown, like all of America, sent troops and rationed supplies. Notably, Elizabethtown's Boy Scouts went above and beyond the call of duty in the war effort by salvaging 1 million pounds of iron and 2 tons of steel. 18 Elizabethtown citizens gave their lives in the war. The town honored their sacrifice and celebrated the victory with a parade in 1946. Post-war prosperity was on its way as once again the town would redefine itself in the second half of the century.
I think that the conversion of the town in the post-war years from a factory town to the solid bedroom community that has become is critical to the longevity of the community and the fact that the town has positioned itself well for the next century.
The Kreider Shoe Factory closed down, the Savoy Shoe Factory closed down, the Risser Garment Factory closed down, and I would think that this was right after World War II when things started to change. The employment changed significantly because Klein's Chocolate Factory grew significantly, but then they were purchased by M&M, and the old shoe factories were turned into apartments.
This shift from a factory to a residential town is the hallmark of the Elizabethtown we know today. The strategic location that drew fur traders in the 1700s is the same reason families today find Elizabethtown to be close to work and great for families.
I think people are still caring. You know, you still have good neighbors, and but I think the attraction here is probably the security and the education, and many, many churches.
Today, Elizabethtown incorporates its history into its present. The most visible aspect of this philosophy can be seen across many town buildings in the historic mural work of Wayne Fetro.
It has its own brand, it has its own feel, I guess, and it's a kind of realistic look, and people in the community really appreciate that, and they can reminisce with a lot of the artwork that has been done. And quite honestly, that's been its signature, reflecting on the past.
Elizabethtown is also reflecting on its past while looking to its future with the development of a sister city program with Letterkenny, Ireland in County Donegal. Letterkenny is at the heart of the region where Elizabethtown's founders came from.
The Irish language is dotted with idioms and phrases and old sayings, but one of my favourites, one I heard from my mother over the years, was that a spug and rud is buinya na and dinya. It's a small thing that outlasts a human, meaning that we pass on, we die, but the things that belong to us stay on, so, you know.
Elizabethtown may no longer be small, but it has lived on, long past its namesake, Elizabeth Hughes, past those who created the railroads and turnpikes, beyond those who started the factory boom in the 1900s, and centuries past those first brave settlers from Donegal. The town prospers, looks to its future, and is a testament to those who came before. Elizabethtown truly is a diamond from Donegal.